sister entity in which we've now placed the government relations and policy-making functions of the IHC. Many of you may not be aware, but we have a very robust policy practice that's operating along basically about 40 American states at this point, typically on a 4-year cycle. 10 years ago, I had the opportunity of writing the first anti-BDS law in the country, which began in the state of South Carolina. Since then, 39 American states have taken up these laws. We've also been at the forefront of having the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism codified for regulatory use, which is now up to 14 states. We've had a very fantastic ride in promoting our community's interests in state capitals around the country, and of course, what makes that possible is the partnership that we receive from fantastic state legislators who are really, really invested in the well-being of our community. And you'll see what a personal matter it is to them as we have a discussion about their perspective. I'm going to begin by pointing out that we have in the middle here Representative Beth Bernstein, who in 2014 was one of the lead sponsors of South Carolina's anti-BDS bill. Eventually, in 2018, she led an effort that made South Carolina the first state in America to codify a uniform definition of anti-Semitism. After that, later on, we worked with her as she conducted the first ever state audit of the state's compliance with its anti-BDS law. And then just 3 months ago, South Carolina finally codified the IHRA definition in formal terms within their state code, and Representative Bernstein led that effort as the lead sponsor. It's been a great run. Obviously, she's prolific, not just in the state of South Carolina, but also in getting other states to follow the bar that she's set. Next to her is Senator Jim Dotson, who prior to his time in the Senate was in the House of Representatives in Arkansas. Representative Dotson also has had a very prolific career in policymaking in support of Israel and the Jewish community. He led his state's formation of its anti-BDS law. The anti-BDS law that Arkansas created was at the center of a major point of litigation. As you guys know, between 2017 and 2023, excuse me, the ACLU brought 6 major federal test cases challenging these anti-BDS laws across 5 circuits. Every single one of those cases was a loss for them. We were very, very pleased to work with the Attorney General's office in Arkansas. That was the one case that actually made it to trial. Eventually, it was appealed, and it went through a very technical process called an en banc appeal, where all of the judges in the 8th Circuit heard this case and came to the conclusion by a 9-to-1 vote that the law we created was perfectly constitutional, that there was nothing about these anti-BDS laws that violates the First Amendment. That was then appealed by the ACLU to the United States Supreme Court, which unanimously rejected consideration of this. The present posture of anti-BDS laws in the United States is that these laws are perfectly legal and are entirely consistent with the U.S. Constitution. So it should never, ever be tolerated when we hear people suggest that somehow our community is in opposition to free speech and the First Amendment. It's a tremendous lie. Representative Dotson also last year led his state's bill to codify the IHRA definition. Many of you probably saw the video as a very beautiful ceremony was held in the state capitol, and Governor Huckabee came out and said some very, very nice words. We know that Arkansas is truly one of the most pro-Israel states in America simply by taking a look at the kind of leaders that emerge within their legislature and their government. Also with us is Representative John Carson from the state of Georgia, who really demonstrates to us. I'll take a step back and point out it's Representative Carson's birthday today. So I want to thank him for taking time out of his schedule and his family life to be with us here this morning. Representative Carson was introduced to us 5 years ago after a test case emerged challenging Georgia's anti-BDS law, where an activist documentary filmmaker decided to put herself on camera and challenge Georgia's anti-BDS law. And we understood that that law needed to be slightly changed in order to make certain that that case couldn't proceed. And we worked together with Representative Carson to make sure that Georgia's anti-BDS law remained safe and sound, and ultimately that case was dismissed. But in the course of that, Representative Carson really had an insight into what anti-Semitism looks like in today's day and age. And as time went on and we really became closer and engaged with him, we could see that he really began to appreciate that there was a big problem with anti-Semitism. Along with us here today is Representative Esther Panich, who was his counterpart in helping to make IHRA law in the state of Georgia. But this was not easy. It was something that required 3 consecutive legislative sessions of work in order to make happen. So when it finally happened, it was a really big deal. And just a few months ago, we were in the state capital of Georgia where Governor Kemp went ahead and signed that bill. But it's a story of perseverance. It's a story of having to creatively solve the problems that emerged within the legislative process. It's a story of not giving up and remaining committed to what we understood as a matter of faith and principle was the right thing to do. And in that process, we saw a whole lot of heart from Representative Carson and from Representative Panich, who constantly were getting on the House floor and were constantly talking about the need to pass this bill because of what it would mean to people who are truly suffering anti-Semitism. And we're beginning to see the benefits of that law having been put in place in the state of Georgia now. So I just want to thank everybody for everything that you do to support IAC and to put us in a position where we're able to go out every single day and to fight on your behalf. The ultimate resource that we have in this process is when the community members show up and really invest their time and their energy into making the mechanisms of public policy move in favor of the community's interests. So with that being said, it's my pleasure to introduce the chairman of IAC for Action, Mr. Shawn Evenhaim, who also I just want to express my personal thanks to for allowing us to do this great work every single day. It doesn't necessarily make it into the papers, and it's not necessarily something that we constantly discuss in front of the members, but I want you to know that every single day, because of the support that we receive from Shawn and from other members of the IAC National Board, we're able to go out and fight every single day on your behalf. So with that said, ladies and gentlemen, Shabbat Shalom. Thank you for everything. I'm looking forward to talking to you later. Shawn, thank you.
Thank you, Joe. So Joe is very humble, but he's one of probably the top experts in the country on these issues. And without him, we couldn't do anything that we do. But without these 3 individuals, which are champions of our cause, they're heroes to me and I know to many. And really, without them, none of the things we accomplished would have been accomplished. So thank you all for everything that you do for us. And as you will see, not everyone on the stage are Jewish, so that's even more amazing to me. So we'll start with you, Representative Bernstein. In the fall of 2014, like Joe mentioned, you signed on as the lead Democrats House sponsor of the country's first anti-BDS law. Just a few months ago, you were the lead sponsors of South Carolina's new statute utilizing IHRA. Tell us about those efforts and what led you to take action.
Thank you, and it's a pleasure to be here. And so I think it's, which you've already pointed out to, important to recognize that the members of their respective General Assemblies are not Jewish who are sitting next to me. I happen to be Jewish, and so I think I've always grown up and it was instilled in me issues of American Jewry and Israel, the importance. And coming from a state like South Carolina, where there are probably 15 to 20,000 Jews in the entire state. And I should point out I'm the only member of the Jewish faith. I'm the only one in the General Assembly, only elected. I might even be the only elected official in the state that is Jewish. There might be some county council members, but, and I think that says, I don't know what it says, but I mean, we just don't have that many Jewish people in our state. But I think I've always had that Jewish identity, and I think when you come from a community with lots of if you're always around Jewish people, you don't preserve that identity quite as much if you're kind of like one of a few. And so being in the legislature gives me that voice for our community, which we might not always have. In getting the IHRA definition passed, I'm fortunate because South Carolina has been a leader on issues of anti-BDS, the IHRA definition, and we were able to codify it this year. And I think the way I was able to do it, and I should say I'm a Democrat and a super minority in the state of South Carolina, and it takes relationships and also the support of organizations like IAC. We also had a support from the APIs at the University of South Carolina. They came an entire day. I see some in the audience here, my good friend David Stark. And it takes relationships and also expressing the importance of why codifying the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, because we can't combat it unless we can define it. And we don't have a good definition, and now we do. So I'm proud to say we're the 35th, I think, and Joe or Jake could highlight on that. I think we're the 35th or 36th state to actually codify it either through statute, which we did, a resolution, or proclamation. And we actually started off by putting it in a proviso, and I think it was a domino effect. And I'm just very proud that I come from a state like South Carolina that has a small Jewish community, but a strong, solid community, and is very, very pro-Israel.
Thank you. And I want everyone to understand that the IHRA definition and the BDS giving us the tool as a community to really enforce and fight anti-Semitism. Without this, we don't have a lot of tools. So one is getting this done, which is very, very hard. And the second thing is enforcement, which we do too, and we need to do more. A few cases that I can use, for example, on BDS is Airbnb in Florida, Unilever, which was Ben and Jerry's ice cream. Those two were a huge success, and we couldn't have won those cases and get to where we got to without those bills in place. And again, you've seen it in the case of Unilever. It started with the attorney, with the treasurer of Arizona, taking a stand and selling investments in Unilever, and then others were forced to. Some attorney generals were contacted and told that they can't hold their investments anymore, and that ended up putting pressure on Unilever to do what they've done. You know, they sold the Israeli branch, and then Joe, did they end up selling Ben & Jerry, or I know? Yeah, they spun off the whole thing. So that was, and it's not just that. If you think about, you're saying, okay, well, we got rid of Ben & Jerry. No, because a lot of other CEOs looking at it and saying, I'm not going there. This was a nightmare. Their stock dropped by substantial percentage, and it was a huge thing. So without, again, everything that you do, we couldn't do it. Senator Dotson, I know that you made statements in the past in regard to something that our enemies and anti-Semites using against, especially our community, about dual loyalty to foreign country. And can you elaborate about that? And if you can tell us a little bit about yourself and why this cause is so important to you.
Well, thank you for having me here. And let me just first say, although I'm not Jewish, as a Christian, I always grew up thinking I was an adopted Jew. Father Abraham, we sang that all the time as a kid in Sunday school and all. But yes, I am a Christian from Arkansas. We're the middle of the Bible Belt, so we're the buckle on the Bible Belt. And you know, with issues related to Israel, it's just second nature. Like I take there's a lot of economic considerations. There's all of the normal things that you say. These are the reasons why we would be supportive, and they all make sense. However, for me personally, why am I passionate about it, and why is it something that is a staple for me? I take a Genesis 12:3 approach, where Abraham was called to go into the land of Canaan, and he says, when you go in there, those who bless you, I will bless. Those who curse you, I will curse. And I'm like, well, if I want to bless Israel personally, so that I and my family am blessed. But as a official for the state of Arkansas, I want Arkansas to be blessed as well. I want God to bless our state. And while I have the authority and I'm in the position that I'm in, I want us to take an official stance and be sure that we are blessing the state of Israel as a state. And I think it has been one of those things that God has continued to bless us as a state, especially when it comes to the passage even of these pieces of legislation. They have been smooth in Arkansas, and they're not smooth everywhere, as Representative Carson here will tell you here in a minute, I'm sure. This has been a great thing for Arkansas, easy to pass, where it's not in all other areas. And it's kind of like one of those, have you ever heard the old saying that when's the best time to plant a tree? It was 20 years ago or today. When do you want shade? I mean, it's if you did it when you didn't need the tree, you'll have shade when you do. And so for Arkansas, we haven't seen a lot of issues popping up, but we have the laws on the books now. So when those things do arise in the future, we have the shade and the law. So if you go back to the anti-BDS legislation that we ran in 2017 that led to the lawsuit Joe was talking about, that is now through the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals, and has been adjudicated at the highest level of anything. I think probably, at least in the United States, maybe, I don't know how these things have been throughout the rest of the world, but it's when you look back at those types of things, it wasn't an issue in Arkansas until we brought it up, and you had to have somebody that would bring it up. It was smooth sailing to get it passed. It was hard to defend. And so the AG's office that Joe worked with, and many of you probably in this room, there was amicus briefs and various things as they fought all the way through court for many years. That defense of that, it was like, what'd you do? Why'd you put this on here? What's going on? Because it was the right thing to do. That's why. I mean, this is something that it just made sense. If we're going to stand with our ally, if we're going to stand with making sure that people are treated fairly, if we're going to stand with making sure that we're good Christian people, this is the right thing to do. It wasn't an issue where there were specific things that we're passing legislation in response to something. However, since then, there have been many instances where the statute has been upheld, one, but then two, used to protect people. And that's what good legislation, in my opinion, does. And I'm sorry, I forgot what the first part of your question was. I got off there.
It's okay, I think you covered that, but you said something that's so important, and you said it's the right thing to do. And to me, this is what we're lacking today everywhere in the world. People don't do what is the right thing to do. And that's a dangerous zone that you get into, because you don't know what people will do anymore, because what's right. And people make their own facts and their own truth, and it's very, very important to keep that always in mind. So next I'll ask Representative Carson. So you're not Jewish too, but you're a brother like Representative Dotson. But in your state, I know how hard it was, and I know how many hours you and our team spent, and it took really 3 consecutive years to get it done. So, and we were very involved throughout the process. But can you share with us why it was so long, what was the process, and why you care for this issue. So
Thank
much.
you for that, Shawn. Wow, this really works. I first became involved with pro-Israel, pro-Jewish legislation back in late 2020 after someone who had been carrying a BDS legislation, should I say anti-BDS legislation, was not reelected, and we were able to get the BDS update that Joe was talking about to basically make a particular lawsuit, a planted lawsuit by CARE, honestly, deemed it null and void in the court system by making it updating it and making it constitutional. And then that was signed in early 2022, and just before Esther came into office, actually. And I was asked to carry the IHRA bill, and it went through the House in Georgia. And just to back up for a moment, Shawn, the reason I do this is because I will just tell you politically, a lot of people say, particularly, 6 weeks before election, oh, this is not about politics. But hear me out on this. I probably have more Jews in this room than I do in my district. Is Esther, am I wrong? I'm doing it because it's the right thing, Shawn. Just like what you talked about. It is the right thing. And like Jim said, he was quoting Genesis 12. To me, and Joe and I have talked about this is what I'm doing as far as passing the IHRA bill, fighting against BDS activities and so forth. It's not about Republican or Democrat or liberal or conservative or this or that. It is about, to me, at a higher level, it is about faith in action. It's about Genesis 12. And at a granular level, it is about protecting a community, the Jewish community, your community, that is constantly being under attack, whether discrimination or violence, you name it. That's why I do what I do.
Representative Bernstein, you have previously joined us at the IAC summit to talk about the importance of removing Israel from the arena of partisanship as an important part of combating anti-Semitism. And you touched it a little bit earlier. Can you briefly tell us how is it that you got such a wide bipartisan support for the bill that you passed?
Well, as I said initially, it's about relationships. I think everything in our life is about relationships. And while I am in the minority party, I pride myself on being able to work across party lines. If you asked anybody in the General Assembly, it's that relationship to be able to work across party lines and having the respect of your colleagues. I'm probably, out of the 170 members of the General Assembly, there are 124 House members and 46 senators, I'm probably the only Jewish person that a majority of those members even know. And so I think having a relationship with them, knowing as they know me how important my faith is to me, because their respective faiths are important to them, but also understanding what it is, because while being of the Jewish faith has obviously, the religious aspect, but I also think it's a cultural community aspect to it. And getting them to understand that and support and respect that. And so I've been really fortunate as I started off. I mean, in South Carolina, we've got pretty substantial leadership who supports the causes of IAC and the causes that most of us feel near and dear to our heart. We have Nikki Haley as somebody who has been a champion for issues of the Republican Party, and then we've got Senator Tim Scott, and we've got lots of people. I don't need to, I guess, sit here and name. And so, having those relationships really is what makes the difference, and also having Jake and Joe and the support that IAC gives with the resources makes my job much, much, much easier. So I thank y'all for that too.
Thank you. And a lot of the work that we do at the IAC for Action is done very quietly, because sometimes you need to go public and get people to get involved. Sometimes you do it behind the scenes, and that's where you're most effective. So you'll hear from us that we've done this and we've done that, but we're not doing it to take credit. And this is not about the IEC. This is about the Jewish people, the state of Israel, our community, and the United States overall. So we'll share with you when we do things, but just so you know, when we say we've done that, Joe and Jake worked on it sometimes 3 years, sometimes 4 years, sometimes a year, so it depends where. So Senator Dotson, I know we touched it a little bit, but one of the things that's being used, especially about us, but about Jewish people in the US, is about the dual loyalty. Are they loyal to the state of Israel, or are they loyal to the US? And I can tell you as an Israeli American, I'm loyal to both countries. I love them both, and I'm very proud to be part of both. So can you share with us your approach to anti-Semitism when it was first put in front of you as a public policy and legislative matter?
Honestly, I'm trying to remember when it first came up. So again, I kind of go back to the stance of when it comes to matters related to Israel, I'm pro-Israel. And so I don't know that I had a huge calculus in whether or not I would be supportive of it or not. I don't even remember exactly where I first heard about it. However, I know getting involved with Joe and Jake and the details of legislation, the specifics, when I can't remember if they brought it to me or if I went to them and said, hey, are we doing something with this? But then obviously they were all in because I'd worked with them related to the anti-BDS legislation and that thing over many years. So, I use IAC as a resource to make sure that the policy is correct, because I don't know the specifics of, I'm not in the Jewish community to where I know the reactions that people have, the challenges that are faced, and truly in Arkansas, there's not a lot of obvious anyway anti-Semitism that's on its face. So it's not one of those things that I have a lot of personal experience. I've observed it through news articles. I've observed it through, obviously movies and television and things like that. But as far as, okay, don't say this, say this. This is going to be charged language. This is not. I don't have a built-in filter, so I'm kind of naive. I just know it's the right thing to do, so I charge forward. And that's how I've handled things related to the anti-BDS legislation, to the IHRA legislation, to resolutions supporting Israel and condemning Hamas after the October 7th attack, and various other things. And oftentimes it's, are we going to say something? Are we going to do something? What's our stance going to be? And I look around, okay, so nobody else is doing it, I guess I'm up. And we charge forward. It goes, when I first started in the legislature, somebody said, it doesn't matter if you don't care who gets the credit or the blame, you can do just about anything. And so it's not, I would love if somebody else was the tip of the spear on certain issues. Sometimes you don't want to be the one trying to come up, not necessarily as far as whether or not you want the credit or you don't want, but trying to think through and have the answers to the questions. When somebody starts to ask you questions, to be prepared to be the expert in the room on a piece of legislation, it's mentally taxing. It's a whole lot easier to sit there and just vote. And that's what majority of people who even are in elected office and are leaders do. They don't come up with the solutions. They sit there, they hear the problems. We all hear the problems. It's easy to diagnose the problems. What's hard is coming up with solutions that work. And then oftentimes, as far as legislators, and you guys may be able to speak to this as well, but my observation of legislators for the most part is, yes, I see the problem, what's the solution? Oh, somebody, Joe has the solution. Let's go with Joe's solution, because to actually dive deep into the issue and figure out the solution it takes work and it takes focus. And so for me personally, it wasn't necessarily a lot of thought put into the question you just asked on dual. It was, okay, this is an issue. We need to address it before it becomes an issue here in Arkansas. And who do I know that has the solution? Let's find the solution that is worked elsewhere, and then I'll introduce it and become read up on it and be the expert in the room, ready to answer questions for other legislators.
Can I add something?
Yeah, but just before, because I want you and John to add, this is true leadership, by the way. You just touched that. The other two items that you touched on was, one, the educational part that the IAC for Action is providing. The expertise are essential to these elected officials, because without that, excuse me, they wouldn't be able to do sometimes what they do. And just so you understand, sometimes in these bills, someone take one sentence, or sometimes someone take one word, the whole bill is different. So it's so important sometimes how we go and educate them why that word should stay there. And sometimes it sounds easy. Let's just this is a compromise. Let's make, and sometimes we have to make compromises, but it's important what compromises we make. But go ahead, Representative Bernstein.
I think that's what I was going to mention about the resource. And I mean, we know that anti-Semitism, the incidence of the anti-Semitic events has risen since October 7th, I think by 400%, I think was the latest ADL statistic that I've looked at. And in order to combat it, we've got to be able to define it. And so that's what's so important about IHRA. And then we also have to be able to educate. And that's what's so important with organizations like IAC, to go out and outreach and make sure that people understand, hey, this is a problem and we've got to be able to fix it. And first, by fixing it, as we're defining it, now we have to enforce it.
Anything you want to add?
I just wanted to mention, I'm an Atlanta native, originally from, born in downtown Atlanta, and we are the home of the civil rights movement. Just a few blocks away from our state capitol is Ebenezer Baptist Church, is the Martin Luther King National Historic Site, and so forth. And it would be an absolute shame, I mentioned this to a few people, it would be an absolute shame to not truly have equal protection under the law for all groups, regardless of gender, regardless of race, regardless of faith, regardless of heritage. It would be an absolute travesty to not have equal protection under the law. And I know Esther agrees with that. And what I notice is that if there's anything that when I look back, I underestimated the opposition on this, Shawn. I really did. There was, you just mentioned one thing, and if I could just piggyback on it. If you take out one word out of a bill, it changes the whole thing, very potentially. And I had a gentleman come up from, I use the word gentleman from CARE, very loosely, gentleman. They're not a friend of mine, or Esther's, by the way. But he came into my office, he said, "Hey, John, you're not a Jew. Why are you doing this?" And I said, "Because it's the right thing." Well, you just take out this one example right here. And he emailed it to me. And he said, and it is basically, you're aware of the IHRA definition and the 11 examples behind it, right? The example that he asked me to omit, and that they would support the bill, or at least go neutral. They wanted the ability to protest against anybody mentioning anything in support or what have you, or anything that would be attacking Israeli people for the actions of the Israel government would not be anti-Semitism. And that right there, Shawn, and that right there, everybody told me exactly where they were coming from. They wanted an out. They wanted to target your community, not mine, not Jim's. They wanted to target your community just on that one technicality. And so when Shawn is absolutely right. When you take out one little definition, it changes everything. And I wasn't going to let them do it. And they lost.
Beth.
So I have a similar situation in the House, and I see Jake nodding yes. The word shall in the definition of, for IHRA, that the state agencies or the whatever the department shall use the definition of IHRA. Doesn't mean that they have to implement it or it's case by case basis, but the word shall was replaced with may. And this was a member who would have swayed a lot of people, would have created a lot of debate on the floor, and could have potentially killed the bill. So I said, okay. And then in talking with Jake, he's like, it changes the entire meeting. We got to fix it. And the way a bill becomes a law, it goes through both chambers. So when it went over to the Senate, I had them put it back in, and smooth sailing. The intent of the IHRA definition is codified with the word shall. It came back over to the House to get approved. That member, and he carried about probably close to 20 members voted against it, but we had enough votes to pass it. But one word and the intention behind that can change whether or not the bill is going to pass or not. And that's where it comes to relationships too, because I had a really good relationship with the chairman of Judiciary in the Senate, and it was able to pass, and we were able to put that word back in. But one word can make a difference.
This speaks highly about the three of you, because we know people think politicians, they just want to do something because they just want to get it done or whatever. You guys took a position, very strong position, that you won't change it. You wouldn't do it just because the IC for Action approached you or someone else approached you. You've done it because it's the right thing to do, and if you're going to do it, you're going to do it right. Because we see, unfortunately, more and more things in our life, in politics, that sometimes those compromises create a bill that's meaningless. But someone can just say, I've done it. So thank you all for really just doing, again, the right thing and making sure that these bills are enforceable and that they have a meaning to them. So Representative Bernstein, how do you respond to those who oppose the use of the IHRA definition and support BDS in the name of social justice or human rights?
So we didn't get too much into when we tried to pass this same bill in 2018. And at the subcommittee hearing is the only time that you can take, and I don't want to get too much into the weeds, but it's the only time we can take public testimony. And Representative Alan Clemens, who's no longer in the House of Representatives, he decided to retire. He was very involved. He was the primary Republican sponsor on this adopting a IHRA definition type of definition for anti-Semitism. So at the subcommittee hearing, we had the committee room filled with more people than what we have right here. And the committee room's much smaller, with Students for Justice for Palestine. And that's my first encounter with Students for Justice for Palestine. And there was...
They're not a friend of ours.
Right. And we were still able to pass the bill. The protest and the arguments that they were making really did not hold much weight eventually. But when it went over to the Senate, we did have some more liberal members and colleagues of mine in my party who were objecting to the bill. And the way the Senate works in our state is one senator can block a bill pretty substantially. We have the filibuster. And he championed so much for social justice. On every other issue, we align ourselves together. But on this particular issue, he was an adjunct professor. He's a lawyer. He's an adjunct professor at the university, and I think he had the ear of maybe some of the colleagues who thought that this would somehow infringe on their ability to be critical of Israel. And so it took from 2018 to 2024 to really convince this particular senator and people of that mindset that, hey, no, this is not a First Amendment issue. This is an issue that as I said, how are we going to address anti-Semitism if we don't define it? And he came around, and it passed overwhelmingly. It could have been unanimous. Maybe one senator voted against it in the Senate. And so I think educating those and people who tend to align themselves with issues that I align myself with were opposed to it. It brought internal dilemma for me. I think this issue is stronger. It's not a partisan issue, but I recognize that more conservative states, more Republican-dominated states do support this type of legislation. And I feel like as a Democrat, I need to make sure that, no, we also support this and educating those members that feel that it would somehow hinder some kind of social justice issue.
So a question to the three of you, and maybe Senator Dotson, you can take it first, about people using the IHRA as it really doesn't allow them to use their First Amendment. And I don't know how you dealt with it in each state, but that's one of the arguments that keep coming up.
This is where that issue didn't actually come up for us in Arkansas. To my recollection, I don't think we had that concern actually come up in any testimony or in any questions. I have heard that, particularly with maybe some of the versions of IHRA legislation that has passed in a few years back, but in recent years, the current definition, or the current IHRA definition that Joe and Jake especially have been helping work through the various states, this model doesn't have that issue that has, I mean, as far as the argument coming up, I'm sure it's been coming up, but as far as whether or not it's a legitimate concern that could be struck down in courts, I don't think that's come up recently. So I'll have to leave it to you guys to answer whether or not you've addressed that.
And any issue with First Amendment for you?
No. You turned it off? Yeah, well, You turned it off? Okay. It's not an issue with the First Amendment. We've made that very clear in subcommittees, full committees, and in leadership meetings and so forth. We made it very clear that the IHRA definition was not a violation. And it's actually very clearly spelled out in the legislation in Georgia, I'm sure it is in other states, that does not have any impact on the First Amendment. What this does, it sets a definition, like Beth said, it sets a definition in regard to if you do certain things and then act upon it in a way that is the predicate for what could be anti-Semitism. It's that plain and simple. And there's a lot of people that just wouldn't accept that. And the reason they wouldn't accept it is they knew politically they were confusing things, but legally they knew we were on sound footing. And that's what they were scared about. They wanted to persecute your community. They wanted to persecute the Jewish people, and we wouldn't let them do it on a technicality.
So I have many more questions, but I want to maybe open it for the people that came this morning. But last question for all of you is, if you could have the Israeli American community, if you give them one advice or one point to take away from this session in general, not just in regard to BDS and IHRA, the importance of the community and how its impact you in a community in any topic want to do something.
Engage, educate, dispel misinformation. I think that's really important. Show, for me, I think it's really important to express and show my Jewish identity, because I am in a place that doesn't have a lot of Jewish members. And that's the most important, is educate, talk about your Judaism if you're in the position to be able to do so, and dispel misinformation. Short and sweet.
Move to Arkansas.
Anyone from California may take that. So.
I just want to say, if I can, Shawn, I want to appreciate everything that IAC has done. And if you don't mind, I want to call out Jake Bennett, Joseph, Joe Sabag. The three of us could not have got this legislation done without their three help. It was unbelievable. Fantastic job. If I could, I just want to reiterate one more thing. And there was a representative that came onto the House floor. It wasn't Esther. And he came over to my desk and he said, John, why are you doing this in regard to the IHRA bill? And he said, the Jewish people are not targeted. Why are you doing this? I said, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm having this conversation. This was not anti-care. This was not anti-Muslim. This is not anti-Hindu. This is not anti-Buddhist. This is not anti-white, anti-black. This was about protecting a targeted people. That's all it was. It was not about hate. It was about loving a targeted community.
Amazing. And before I open it for question, I just want to share with you, no matter if you're Jewish or not, and I know we talked a lot about it, you are our brothers, you're our sisters, we're all together in this, we all love this country, and we want the world to be a better place, and that's why we all do what we do. So we have time for probably one or two questions, so go ahead, Roy, and then we'll go another one. So
one of the things about IHRA that makes it so unique is it's the first. So IHRA, one of the great things about it is it makes the connection between anti-Zionism and anti-Israel, and where criticism of Israel becomes anti-Semitic, using those three examples that IHRA gives. Are the people that you guys speak to, are they understanding why that's the case, or are they doing it kind of just because they want to support, or like, because if they're not really understanding it, there's ways around, because it's not a perfect definition. There's ways around, for example, equating Israel to Nazi. But you can demonize Israel in other ways, which isn't necessarily calling them Nazis, but saying other really negative things. So are people sort of understanding why the connection between anti-Israel and anti-Semitism is there?
Can I take that?
Yeah.
If I may, I don't want to steal Beth's thunder, but if the best thing that I would say to that is, your question was, are people truly understanding the IHRA definition and how all of it is necessary, not just this piece, that piece, and what have you. Without a lot of education, like what Beth was talking about, no. Honestly, no, they're not. People in my area, in North Atlanta, in Esther's area, not in my driveway, but people were littered with anti-Semitic paraphernalia. There were basically swastikas that were put on stickers outside the Israeli consulate in downtown Atlanta. There were protests of neo-Nazis in my county, of Cobb County, up in the northwest Atlanta area, as well as in Bibb County, which is the middle, Macon, Georgia. Are people, by and large, aware of all what's going on? No, they're not. And that's why I think what Beth said is so important about educate. I will tell you that I had almost as many emails from pro-Muslim people via CARE, and it was all over the state. I mean, they weren't limited to my district by any means. But they're just such, and like I said before, I had so underestimated the opposition to this, so underestimated it. To answer your question, no, and that's why I think it's incumbent upon both us together, brothers, like Shawn said, evangelicals and the Jewish faith, to come together to educate people about this problem.
And when you have a strong opposition to a bill, you know it's a good bill. And we 3 sessions to pass it in Georgia. So go ahead in the back there. If you can come forward, I'll give you the mic.
That the talk among this always goes to free speech, saying, "Oh, I can't say this about Israel," or "We can't believe this." But have you been able to impart? And are there any concrete examples of it? It's not being simply suppressing what someone says on Twitter or something, but that coercive action that's used to exclude Jews, Israelis, Israeli businesses, and how the anti-boycott legislation and adopting the IHRA definition prevents such exclusion and discrimination and such, rather, because the subject keeps going back to free speech and I can't say this, but I never see the boycott or the IHRA legislation directed towards what you say, but it's about excluding and discriminating. So has that been able to sort of been crystallized in this?
I think when you bring up the free speech argument, it's twofold. One, they don't understand the bill, obviously, and a way to combat and say that why they don't support it, which doesn't have much teeth to it. I'll tell you, in South Carolina, the IHRA definition is limited in its application. We are one of only 2 states that has no hate crime legislation on its books. So right now, it's very limited in how it can be used. It could be used with within the university and with the state HR. How we're seeing it maybe being applied now is local municipalities are passing hate crime legislation. And so we really haven't had too many, that argument coming up for us and correlating with any kind of like specific incident.
Go ahead in the front here.
We live in a democracy where the majority makes the decisions for others. How do you argue the point of what is the right thing to do when the majority doesn't understand and doesn't believe that this is the right thing to do?
Are you talking about something specific, or you're saying in general? And you talk about the
I'm talking about my son's experience in school where the majority was for Palestinians. They did not understand that they were supporting Hamas in what they were saying.
And sometimes I think it's a loud minority rather than a majority. And sometimes people think that because this loud minority is so loud that everybody feels that way. And from a legislative standpoint, in the legislature, sometimes, we're getting off topic here, but redistricting reform, it might be necessary. The way these districts are drawn, we're not getting full representation. That could be an issue. I hope and feel that it is not a majority of people that are expressing discontent.
Everybody else is coming against you. How do you argue that you are right?
Go ahead.
That's
So,
continue to fight and champion that issue. That's hard. I'll let.
so
It's hard sometimes.
It is.
Sometimes you feel like you're hitting your head against a brick wall to get people to understand and say, this is not right. You don't see, and what you're saying, the reasons why are untrue. It's not happening what's happening in Israel. That's where you're seeing it mostly. And as a Jew, an American Jew, it's very frustrating for me. And all I can do is continue to fight against that rhetoric or that misinformation, and I don't want to believe that it's the majority. For me.
Want to add anything?
yeah, and sometimes it's really difficult sometimes when you're in a specific area and in a specific instance where, yes, you are the minority in that room, obviously. But if you take a step back, sometimes it's hard to see the entire picture if you're really close up on it. Because on these types of issues, and of course I'm speaking obviously as my experience in Arkansas, where we are in the majority on this issue, in particular, but I've been in the minority on a lot of other issues, and in that instance, you're like, look, not only are the voters that elected me wanting this type of thing done, I have to continue to make the argument because it is the right thing to do on whatever the issue is that I'm fighting for, even if I lose the vote today, because I begin to chip away at that argument in the minds of other folks, and then I pick up a little bit some more support in the next session or in the next time around, and we continue to build that support and build that to where it grows. And then sometimes you have to look at the issues that you're dealing with. In this particular one, obviously you're not the majority in every state. I still hope we're the majority in the country. I believe that we are, as far as the nation is concerned, and I think that's why one side is very divided on it, because they've got a lot of the pro Hamas folks within there, and one side is very united on the issue because they are very pro-Israel all the way through and through. That's a majority of the country. So I think we're still there as a majority of the country, but in the specific instances, it takes boldness and leadership in some of those areas where it is tougher to take a stand and make sure that in particularly the one area is college campuses, that we're seeing in America that mindset that is very pervasive, and to a certain extent, it's kind of a good thing that it's raising its ugly head to where we can address it as the majority of the country before it becomes the majority of mindset in what the next generation that's coming up will be. And so hopefully it's shown its ugly face soon enough that we can stop the tide before it actually becomes a majority of the country. Otherwise, move to Arkansas.
So they telling me that there is another session that need the room. We're going to hang around here for a little bit so you can approach us and talk. I want to thank you for your brotherhood, for your commitment, for your leadership, because that goes to the last question. It's leadership. Leadership don't just do what few wants, and no matter if they're louder than others, leadership do what's right, as we started. So thank you for doing always what's right.